All rise.
The Kosovo Specialist Chambers is now in session.
Be seated. Mr. Court Officer, please call the case.
Good morning, Your Honors. This is the file number case CVC 2020-06, the Specialist Prosecutor versus Thaçi, Kadri Veseli, Recep Selimi, and Jakub Kresniki. Thank you, Your Honors.
I note that the accused are all present in the courtroom today. Before we continue hearing the evidence of prosecution, witness W04752, there is one preliminary matter the panel wishes to address. Yesterday, the Thaçi defense objected to the SPO releasing a new presentation cue for the redirect of W04752. The panel allowed the presentation cue. In light of the panel's ruling permitting the SPO to release the presentation cues for redirect, the Thaçi defense requested the panel apply the same principles to any documents that the defense wishes to add to their presentation cues following judicial questioning, and dispense with the need for the defense to seek leave for any documents to be added to their presentation cues. The panel recalls that it has permitted redirect examination in accordance with Rule 127, Paragraph 3, and Paragraph 111 of the Order on the Conduct of the Proceedings only on matters arising in cross-examination with the leave of the panel. If the calling party wishes to put further documents to a witness during redirect examination, it must release a presentation cue immediately upon completion of cross-examination and need not seek leave to release the presentation cue. The panel also recalls that it has permitted questions by the parties with the leave of the panel in accordance with paragraph 112 of the Order on Conduct of the Proceedings, where questions put to a witness by the trial panel after cross-examination and redirect examination raise entirely new matters. If a party wishes to put further documents to a witness during such questioning, it must release a presentation cue immediately upon completion of questions by the trial panel and need not seek leave to release the presentation cue. The presentation cues of all parties who plan to ask questions arising from the questions by the trial panel shall be released immediately upon the completion of the trial panel's questions. Any addition to a released presentation cue is then subject to leave from the trial panel. Now, Mr. Misitich, I understood you had a question or a comment?
Yes, if we could go into private session.
Certainly. Into private session, please, Mr. Court Officer.
Your Honors, we are back in public session. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Zarapi.
Mirëmëngjesi.
Good morning.
I remind you once again to please try to answer the questions clearly with short sentences. If you don't understand a question, feel free to ask counsel to repeat the question or tell them you don't understand and they will clarify. Also, please try to indicate the basis of your knowledge of facts and circumstances upon which you will be questioned. Please also speak into the microphone and wait 5 seconds before answering a question and speak at a slow pace for the interpreters to catch up. If you feel the need to take breaks, please make an indication and an accommodation will be made. I remind you that you are still under an obligation to tell the truth as stated by you in your solemn declaration. I also remind you, as advised last week, that you are not required to answer a question that is incriminating unless and until the panel compels you to answer, and that if such a question arises, you or your assigned counsel may raise the issue to the panel, and we will proceed to determine whether or not, and under what circumstances, you might be compelled to answer. We continue now with the redirect questions by the SPO. Please give the prosecutor's office your attention. Go ahead, Madam Prosecutor.
Thank you, and good morning.
Mirëmëngjesi.
Good morning.
I'm at the time period where you were outside of Kosovo in September and October 1998. Counsel for Mr. Krasniqi read part of the relevant information from the preparation note to you that was at T18026. So I would like to ask some additional questions to capture the information that was not read to you. While you were outside of Kosovo during that time period, did you have any direct contact with members of the general staff who were in Kosovo?
Jo,
No.
And although he wasn't yet a member of the general staff, did you have direct contact with Fatmir Limaj during that time period?
jo,
No.
Were there members of the general staff outside of Kosovo who provided you with some information about what was happening inside Kosovo at that time?
jashtë Kosovës ka qenë komandant.
The general commander, Azem Sylla, was outside Kosovo.
Were there any other general staff members outside of Kosovo who you had contact with during that time period and who provided you with information?
Jo,
No.
Did you have contact with Kadri Vaseli during that time period?
me Kadri Veselin kom pa.
I had contacts with Kadir Veseli after I returned from the Western countries, and we started the negotiations, discussions with the Bukoshi government, but not prior to that.
Now, you were shown a statement from Mensur Kasumi during the testimony, and I'd like to ask just a couple of further questions about that. First, was Mensur Kasumi ever in charge of the operational directorate of the KLA?
Jo, pradžės
No, he was not in charge of the operational directorate. He was part of the operational directorate. I had asked him until the return of Veseli to deal with G2 counterintelligence, to inform me about the Serbian forces movements and their overall forces at the time.
Okay, so at paragraph 6, where he had said that he became in charge of the operations directorate, that must be a mistake. Now, what I want to ask you about is April 1999, after the formation of the provisional government, when Mr. Kasumi says he became chief of ZKZ. At that time, after the provisional government was formed, had Sheikh also been created?
me formimin iš
With the formation of the provisional government started the formation of Sheikh.
So Kadri Veseli had moved across and become head of Sheikh, is that correct?
po.
Correct.
Do you know how Sheikh was staffed? Did anyone else move with Mr. Veseli?
Jo, nuk e di ato.
No, I don't know about that. If we're talking about the period of time when he returned and the start of the bombing, I don't know who was close to him in this sense.
So I'm changing topic and I'm going back to the summer of 1998. Did members of the general staff have a security unit that they used at that time?
Po në verës 98,
In summer 98, this was most done by the members of Brigade 121, soldiers who would be the escort and secure the movements. We are talking about the Pashtekop zone. If we were in Berisha, if we were in Delnica, then it would be soldiers from that area who would provide security for us, or in other zones, other soldiers from those zones.
And did those units sometimes travel with and accompany general staff members when they were moving around the different zones?
po në qoftë se kemi levi,
Yes, if we move from one zone to another, the soldiers of that zone that would escort us. So if we take soldiers from the Pashtrik zone, if we were visiting the Pashtrik zone, soldiers of the Pashtrik zone would accompany us to the Drenica zone, say, and then the soldiers from that zone where we would go would take over.
So, for example, when the general staff members visited Dukagjini in July 1998, did members of the Berisha unit travel with them to Dukagjini?
po për shembull këtë rastën
I don't remember exactly in this case. From Marisha, soldiers from Brigade 122 in Malishevos accompanied us to the border of Dukajin, And then on the border with the Dukajin area, we were taken by soldiers of the Dukajin area and went into the Dukajini zone. Sometimes there was a unit under the command of Ilusha Gushi who would escort us from the Dukajini inside the territory where we were going in Bashtrik or the Drenica zone. So this is what I remember how things were at the time.
So with the panel's leave, I'd like to read a short portion of your testimony in Haradinai. The reference is IT 0484 T 3256. It's page 3286 in the English that I'm going to read from, and it would be page 31 in the Albanian. The question you were asked was, and then you told us that they were accompanied to Jablanica by a group of soldiers from the Berisha area. Is that right? Answer, yes. Question, can I put it to you this way? Were they borrowing the soldiers from the Berisha unit to take them to Jablanica? Answer, I don't know what you mean by borrowing, but that was the unit that was guarding the general staff there. And that was the unit that escorted the general staff to Jablanica as well, a security unit. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. And I said earlier that there was the unit under the command of Ilusha Gushi from the Dukajini area. At the time, this was the unit which escorted us from Dukajin to Berisha.
And you've just mentioned the unit under Agushi. Is that the Mala unit that was referenced earlier in your examination?
Yes, Malay, the nickname for Ilusha Gushi.
During approximately what time period did the Mala unit operate under the auspices of the General Staff?
From what I remember, starting from when I went there in July, and it was the escort unit throughout the time in August, September 98. And then when I returned to Kosovo, it was still there.
And what were its functions? You've already described escort as one of them. Did it have additional functions?
In addition to the escort functions, that unit was stationed mainly in Dukajin. I don't remember the village, and that's the area where it operated.
You were asked about access of general staff members to satellite phones in summer 1998. And I'd like to read you some short pieces of text from a journalist who was in Likots and in the Drenica area from the end of June until September 1998. Can we please bring up SPOE 00209 ET? And the first page I want to go to is 209451. The first piece of text that I'm going to read to you is from the end of June 1998. In the English, I'm reading from the middle of the page. There are some white plastic chairs under the plum trees. The Serbs, starts Luli when we have seated ourselves. They will never let you leave, never. He takes out something that looks like a laptop, opens the cover and positions it slanting upwards. It's the first time I've seen a satellite telephone. What is the number, he asks. Is it right that some of the satellite phones looked a bit like laptops?
Mr. President, I'm going to object on the basis that the SPO led on direct through his 154 statement at Part 14, page 12, as to when the date of the satellite phones came in. To the extent it's impeaching now the evidence that was submitted in direct, not cross, we object.
Your Honour, what I asked the witness on direct was in relation to when he personally first obtained a satellite phone, and then on cross it was asked specifically whether other members of the general staff had access to satellite phone.
Mr. President, if I may just respond.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the questioning during direct. I'm saying in the SPO interview, and it's clear, Part 14, beginning at page 11 and going on to page 12, what the witness's testimony is, and that is considered his testimony on direct. It was very specific as to what they had in their abilities from June to November, and then what came about in December and thereafter. So it's not something that arose in cross. This is their direct, what they tendered, and now it's impeachment of direct evidence.
Objection's overruled. You may continue with the question.
My question was, is it right that some of the satellite phones looked a bit like laptops?
Yes, that's correct. It was composed of, there were two components. One which you would open a cover that looked like a laptop, but did not have a screen. There was an antenna which was to be placed outside to receive signal.
Can we move please to page 9465? And again, I'm reading from the middle of the page in the English. He says that a young man takes me over to a man in a green raincoat who understands German and laughs patiently at my frustrations over Luli having disappeared and that no one accepts responsibility for me. I have heard about you, he says in a calm voice. Luli is not here. In a few days you will get more information. If you wish to ask for me, my name is Jarpri. The name means the snake. Jarpri brings me to a car with a satellite telephone standing on the bonnet. I call home and am able to talk with both of my parents. And can we move please to page 9472? And this next quote I'm reading is from September 1998. And I'm reading from the second half of the page in the English. In the evening, Jarpri pops up and says I can accompany him, Chopa, and Kapush to another place. He is in a jubilant mood and jokes that he is the only one in the car who is not limping. The way Chopa drives, I don't know how much longer that will last. The wheels spin in the mud and the dirt sprays in all directions. Soon we come to a village on a hill. Jarpri asks me to follow along into a house. A paraffin lamp hangs from the ceiling. Behind a curtain in the window is a satellite telephone. What is the number, he asks. Who had the nickname Jarpri?
Mr. President, I'm going to object. Different ground this time. It was in the SPO interview as to the dates of the satellite phones. It should have been done on direct, and now it's being done on a redirect at a point where the defense doesn't have an opportunity to cross on this. So we object as to the prejudice created.
Objection is overruled. Go ahead.
Who had the nickname Jarpri?
Novkan Jarpri ka
Hashim Thaçi had the nickname Jarpri.
Who had the nickname Kapush?
nu Kapush pa Kapuchi mu.
Not Kapush, but it could be Kapuch. This was a nickname used by the brigade commander, Mój Krasniczy.
And who used the nickname Chopa?
Nuk e di tash se të kanë.
I don't know, because there were 2 or 3 persons limping. That could have been Chopa. I don't know exactly who that person was.
Who were the people you knew with the nickname Chopa who were limping?
She Charling e ka bo. Sajt Jashari.
Sahid Yashari was limping. Sabit Gezi was limping. And then in the narrow demo zone, there was a Chopa. I don't know his name.
Okay. And you've already mentioned that both Sabit Gezi and Mój Krasniczy had been wounded and were transferred for treatment in Albania in approximately September 98. Is that correct?
Po.
That's correct.
And finally, can we please go to page 9462? And I'm reading from the top of the page. Later that morning, an officer enters the dormitory. He is tall and strong, with a bushy beard and a beret. The man says that his name is Femi, and he is the commander in the area. I'm then skipping 2 lines. I ask Femi whether it's possible to call the Norwegian embassy in Belgrade. He goes out, fetches a satellite telephone from the car, and rigs it to the window. After a couple of attempts, I get through to the ambassador. He seems a little bewildered about the call, but understands that I cannot say where in Drenica, where I am in Drenica. Was there a commander called Femi in the Drenica zone?
Po, komandant.
Yes. The brigade commander, Femila Droci.
Is it right that he was tall and bearded?
Po.
Yes.
Can we please bring up P01426? We might need to zoom in, but at row 6, we can see Femi Ladrovsky's name. And the date in the column on the left is May 1998. Did Femi Ladrovsky have a satellite phone?
Nukedi.
I don't know.
Your Honour, I'd like to tender the 3 pages from the prior document that the witness commented on. So that is pages ending 9449, 9472, and 9462.
Objection?
Yes, yes, the same objections I've made. This should have been done on direct, and now we can't cross.
SPOE 002094434 ET.
Basically, Your Honour was about to rule. May I inquire whether Your Honours have it in mind that we may be able to cross this after cross-examination?
I do not have that in my mind at this time, no.
Very well. Because clearly there are matters arising now, arising out of this material, that certainly I would want to explore with the witness. Now, it is a rather awkward situation that we find ourselves in if this is being introduced now and there isn't to be an opportunity. Sometimes in the past, Your Honours have allowed questioning of matters arising in re-examination.
Well, let us finish this and get to that point, and then you may raise the objection or raise your position again.
Well,
I'm sorry. So in that ERN range, is that the correct range?
Yes, so it was just the...
So there's pages 9449, 9472, and 9462.
Correct, thank you.
They are admitted and will be assigned.
And will be assigned exhibit number P01449, classified as confidential. Thank you, Your Honors.
All right. Go ahead.
And Mr. President, if I may just, our request would be that since we can't cross, that the prosecutor be required to put her case to the witness on the point she wishes to make with him.
Mr. Mistic, paragraph 112 of the order on the conduct of proceedings directly addresses cross-examination. And it states that the trial panel shall only permit cross-examination if new material is introduced during redirect examination or cross-examination by any party or participant. So it is governed. You can seek leave to do so.
I believe Mr. Emerson has just made that point, and it's not clear that we're going to get that opportunity. So I have to make my record and make the objection.
Well, it will be determined in due course, I think.
You may go ahead.
Those exhibits may be reclassified as public, I believe.
Reclassify as public.
Thank you, Your Honors. P01449 will be classified as public, both English and Albanian transcript. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we please bring up P01267?
if I may seek for guidance, are we going to show the transcripts, the video?
Yes, I was going to play the first minute of the video. Thank you.
So it's going to be only the video that is going to be shown.
The video and the English transcript. Thank you.
pastron poplen, pastron jokin.
On 12 March, with the fall of the Yashari people, 40 military men, including Agim Chelay, came to the government office in Bonn. I remember it like today. There were also Bislim, as usual, Salih, Kemal Chachiri, Rustem Berisha. They were all ready to go to the front line. There was fighting on the front line that day. Kadri Veseli was also at the front line, and he called us by phone from there. He called and he said, "Professor, listen to the shells that Serbia is firing at the population. We are at the front line." Agim Chelay asked me to give him the phone. I gave it to him, and to cut it short, as we say, he began teaching him how to set up the trenches, how to go here and there. We ended the meeting with tears in our eyes, and Agim was ready to go to the front line immediately. After the battle,
Do you remember this meeting? Well, first, do you recognize who's speaking in the video?
Po, personi që flet është
yes, it's Muj Rugova. I was at that meeting, yes.
And do you remember Agam Chelay having taken the phone and spoken to Kadri Veseli?
nuk më kujtohet kur.
I don't remember when that conversation occurred. At that time, I did not see it.
You weren't there while the phone call was made, is that correct?
Jo, në atë kohë kur kemi shkuar që
The meeting that Mujrugova is mentioning is a meeting attended by all officers who had combat experience and who intended to go into Kosovo immediately. As for Mujrugova-Kadri Veseli relations, they did keep contact at that time with Femi as well. And this contact continued onwards. The student was Hashim Thaçi and Kadri Veseli, and the professor was Muj Rugova. We too, the officers who had started to arrive in Albania, went to Kosovo.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. And I understand from your answer that you don't remember the specific phone call that's being, that Muj Rugova is describing, is that right?
Po, jo, nuk më kujtohet, fare.
I don't remember at all the phone call involving Agim Chelay and Kadri Veseli. He did not mention it at the time, and I do not remember it.
Thank you. So Finally, Defence Counsel asked you about when the interim rules for organisation of the internal life of the KLA were created, and suggested that your testimony here was different from testimony that you'd given previously. Can we please bring up IT 0587_1 T2423 and in the English page 2452 and in the Albanian page 32. And what's being brought up on the screen here is your testimony at the ICTY in the Djordjevic trial. The question you were asked was, thank you, Mr. Zairapi, but these were interim regulations on the organisation of internal affairs in the Army that you passed in November 1998. Am I correct? Answer, in November I received this document. The document was compiled earlier. Is the information I read correct?
Paul,
Yes, there was regulations earlier, and we amended and supplemented it from November onwards. Not only the regulations, but also other regulating documents.
Thank you. Your Honour, I am nearing the completion of my questions now. I just have one caveat, and that is in relation to the Javataliti video that was shown yesterday. Our position, obviously, is that it's a short, self-contained speech and that it should be admitted in full. If the panel was minded only to admit the first paragraph, I might want to show some further of the content to the witness.
Yes, I stand my position yesterday, so if there's more that the prosecution wishes to extract from that video for its case, it should be put to the witness.
We've looked it over and discussed it and make a decision that the entire video will be admitted. It needs to be assigned an exhibit number if it has not already.
Thank you, Your Honor. We will proceed accordingly. Thank you.
And Your Honours, that completes my questioning.
Right.
Mr. Zairapi, thank you again for your attention.
Mr. President. Oh.
Anticipating your request again, Mr. Emerson, we will grant you the request on the specific issue of the satellite phones that were just issued. You may do a recross on that.
Yes. Just to be clear, first of all, the question I wanted to ask relates not to the phones but to the book that was being cited. Not to the phones specifically, but to the book.
Okay, you want to, well, you just have a short question about the...
Yes, another passage from the book, but unfortunately the timing is such that I'm literally going through the material as I sit here to try to find the opportunity to ask the question, try to find the passage that I need. So it may be that if Your Honours would allow me, it's a question to which I could be given some latitude in questions following
Well,
judicial questioning.
Let's begin with
Yes.
the request by Mr. Misitich.
Yes, Mr. President, I actually had more than that, but I will finish it within 10 minutes. And that
More
is-
than that, what do you mean, more than that?
Well, obviously, the satellite phones, the issue of the video that you just said you're going to play the whole thing, I would then like to put it to the witness, since the prosecution's not putting it to the witness for the proposition. I think we should hear from the witness on these.
I'm only granting it for one reason, and that's for the satellite phones. That was what was raised, and that's what we will allow.
Well, I can finish it all in 10 minutes or less.
Start out with the phones, we'll see how it goes. It
Mr.
isn't a timing issue. It's what you ought to be able to do, so go
Okay.
ahead.
Mr. Zarapi, just briefly, in your SPO interview at Part 14, page 12, you testified to the SPO in 2019. Actually, I apologize. Let me find the right page. Yes, page 11. You said, so from June to November of 1998, we only had Motorola equipment that was a very short network or short range. And then you continue on the next page. And so the only contact could be done, for example, through a courier. Question, what about a satellite phone? Answer, later on, that only came about in December and after that. Question, so just from a practical perspective, before you got the satellite phone, you would use couriers? Answer, yes. Then it goes on, and this is just so that I understand, how much time would pass that you would give a message and someone would come back and revert with an answer? And your answer, so at the time, I didn't have direct contact with Mr. Sula. At that time, it was more Jakub Krasniqi and others who had direct contact. But when we would send a courier to communicate, it would take him a full 2 days to get there. Right? Is that correct?
Po, exact точно.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Directorate, as far as you know, you were an officer of the Operations Directorate beginning in June and then became the director of the Directorate in mid-July. Did it have a satellite phone that it could communicate, for example, with the overall commander in Albania?
Jo.
No, I explained it very well back then, and no, I did not have a satellite phone, and I did not have a satellite phone during that time. From June and until I came back from Albania, I did not have a satellite phone, and neither did the operations directorate have one. The contact and how we maintain contact is as I described it. Now, whether somebody else had a satellite phone or not, that I don't know, and I cannot comment on that.
Now let's talk about the units, right? So you're in the Operations Directorate. Do you know of any units of the KLA that had satellite phones with which someone might be able to communicate?
Jo. Mu sem kujtohet jo.
No, as far as I remember, no. When I visited and inspected these units, I did not see satellite phones with them. From September and until I returned to Kosovo again, I did not see any with them.
Mr. President, I would have just a few very short questions on the issue of Javed Haliti and whether there was a political directorate. Okay. Yes, I think we released one document in the queue. I don't know if we're allowed to use it. It's an admitted exhibit, 1D50, I would like to put to him.
No objection.
Mr. Court Officer, if we could put exhibit 1D50, please, on the screen. Okay, I guess we don't have it, so I'll just read it. Mr. Zarapi, I will just tell you what the document is. It's a political declaration number 7 from the 13th of August, 1998, in which the KLA formally announced, and it says, and I'll read the quote from the 3rd paragraph, quote, with the intention of cutting off the manipulations related to the creation of these institutions, the General Staff makes it known to the public that Jakub Krasniqi, Javed Haliti, Bardal Mahmouti, Hashim Thaçi, Faton Mehmetai, and Sokol Bashota are the political representatives of the KLA. The public announcement of the KLA's political representatives facilitates the coordination of political activity at the national level. Now, were you aware that in August, the KLA had publicly identified those individuals, including Javed Haliti, as a political representative of the KLA?
Po,
Yes. At the time, Javid Haliti was also a political representative of the KLA, and we also had political representatives abroad in various countries who acted on behalf of the KLA.
Political directorate, could he be actually referring to these individuals that the KLA had a month earlier publicly announced were the political representatives? Or do you know?
nuk kam dionin ato që
I don't know what he meant by that, but at the time there was no political directorate. Maybe in his opinion, because of the political representatives in various European countries, he called it a sort of directorate. But I, within the structure, did not see a political directorate active during that period.
And last question, could these members of the political directorate, such as Javed Haliti, issue orders to soldiers on the ground to implement the tasks of the General Staff?
jo, këta janë përfaqësues politik.
No, they were political representatives and were in various countries. They dealt with political issues, with internationals, with diplomatic relations concerning Kosovo.
Mr. Zarapi and Mr. President, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Emerson, please
No.
confine it, just go ahead.
I've reviewed my position and I don't propose to make an application.
We'll take the 10-minute break right now before we have the judges' questions. So please, you may leave the room for 10 minutes. We're adjourned for 10 minutes.
All rise. All rise.
Be seated. Madam Usher, you can bring the witness in. Mr. Zarapi, we now have some questions from the judges. We'll begin with Judge Barta, who is to my left, to your right.
Thank you, Judge Smith, and good morning, Mr. Zarapi.
Mierdita.
Good morning.
Po.
Yes, I can.
Mr. Zarapi, the panel has followed your testimony with great interest and attention over the last 2 weeks. We have also carefully reviewed the transcript of your testimony, and while doing that, a number of questions have arisen which we believe require further clarification. To this end, I would like to go through your evidence chronologically with you in order to clarify these questions. Do you understand this?
Po.
I do, yes.
My first question is about a document shown to you by the prosecution on the 1st of July 2024. That was the first day of your testimony. It's exhibit P01381, and it's still classified as confidential. Mr. Court Officer, could you please bring this exhibit back on the screen without broadcasting it? Just heard that the document is public, so it can be broadcasted. Mr. Zarapi, as you can see, the document is about unifying, unifying the Chellico, Lumi, and Lisi units. And my question relates to the following passage from pages 17358 and 9 of the transcript, which reads as follows, I quote. And this is what you said on the 1st of July. We discussed the unifying of these units, of these tasks. I had more in Suareka area, where these units, Chellico and Lisi, were operating. Lumi was in the territory of Malasheva municipality. These two units were unified in the Suareka area into one local staff, which was at the time called Suareka Local Staff. This would be, in short, my contribution in unifying these units at the time. Question, and did you make recommendations or proposals to the general staff in relation to the unification of these units? Answer, yes, because I was sent there, first of all, by Sokol Bashota, since these two units operating in that area had problems. They were not in good relations. So to eliminate these problems and unify the two units, I went there, spoke to both units, unified them, and we established the local staff of Suareka. And of course, once this was completed, I informed the operational directorate about the unification of these units and about the establishment of the Surareke operational staff, local staff. Question: and did the General Staff approve this unification and the proposals that you had made? Answer: first of all, the General Staff at that time was called Central Staff. Of course, I informed the Operational Directorate, that is Sokol Bashota, as the head of the Operational Directorate, end of quote. Mrs. Serapi, in the last sentence of this quite long passage, you said, of course, you informed the Operational Directorate, namely Sokol Bashota. But the question asked by the prosecution was slightly different. The question was, did the General Staff approve this unification and the proposals you made? So let me ask you again, did the General or the Central Staff approve the unification of the units mentioned in this document?
At the time I made the proposal, actually I informed the Operational Directorate about the organization, the unification of this local staff. Now, was it approved or how was it dealt with? I don't know. I reported on my work. I was not present in the meetings of the staff to know whether they approved or not or how they proceeded.
Thank you. Thank you. Did anybody from the Central Staff, a member of the Central Staff, Mr. Bashota, for example, complain about the unification of this unit?
No, he did not complain. He complained earlier. They sent me there because these units were not coordinating their work amongst themselves, they were not cooperating, and the idea was how to assist these units. The consequence of this was that these two units merged, unified, and formed the local staff. As we read the document that was typed and drafted, it's an original document drafted on that day. After this, we informed that this staff was formed. Everybody came closer, and the local staff was formed. There were no further complaints, either from Sokol Bashota or the staff.
Thank you. And is it correct that the Cheluku unit later turned into Brigade 121, based in the Berisha Mountains? Lumi became Brigade 122, based in Maleshevo, and Lizzie turned into Brigade 123, based in Surareke. Is that correct?
Posakt.
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Serapi, my next questions are about what you told the prosecution on the 2nd of July 2024 regarding Exhibit P01408. Mr. Court Officer, can we please have this exhibit back on the screen? Can we please go to page 2 of the document? On page 2 of this document, it mentions the Intelligence Directorate, or G2, which according to the document reports to both the commander and the Chief of the General Staff. Do you see that, Mr. Serapi?
Yes.
7435 of our transcript, you said by referring to the commander, it would mean to both the commander in Albania and the commander in Kosovo, but mostly, you said, to the one in Kosovo, because that commander would receive the report directly. Since we have learned that there was more than one deputy commander in Kosovo at a certain point in time, the panel would like to know which commander in Kosovo you were referring to.
Për zëvendës komandantën, se
The deputy commander, because there were two deputy commanders inside Kosovo, Jakub Krasniqi and Sokol Bashota.
So would both deputy commander receive reports from the intelligence directorate, or G2, or only one?
po tash më varë prej se ku ne ka.
Depending on who was this sent to the deputy or to both of them, he would report, or they would report mostly to the person they were most frequently in contact with, in this case, Jakub Krasniqi.
And who was the commander in Albania at the time? Was that Azem Zula?
Azem Syla, për Azem Sylën folim.
Azem Syla. We always refer to Azem Syla when we talk about outside Kosovo in Albania.
My next question concerns exhibit P01105 and what you told Mr. Serapi, the prosecution, on the second day of your testimony, and also later during your cross-examination by the Salimi defense. Mr. Court Officer, could you please show this exhibit again? Thank you, Mr. Serapi. As you can see, this document purports to be an order or ordinance by the General Staff signed by Deputy Commander Jakub Krasniqi for Pestrik Operational Zone Commander Drini, the commander of Brigade 123, as well as Blarim Kuchi, to report to the KLA General Staff on the 16th of January 1999. And you said on page 17446 of the transcript that you were present when Mr. Kuchi actually reported to the General Staff, and that he came together with Zone Commander Ekrem Rekja, also known as Commander Drini, and Brigade Commander Nexmedin Krastrati. Is that correct?
Po,
That's correct.
Told us that from what you remember when the three arrived, the Zone Commander, Commander Drini, went with you to the Operational Directorate office and you discussed operational matters, whereas Nexmedin Castrati went to Brigade 121 to discuss their related matters, and Blarim Kuchi was left in the command. Is that right?
po sakt.
That's right.
And in the command with Blarim Kuchi were, as you said, Jakub Krasniqi, Recep Selimi, and Fatmir Limaj. Is that correct?
Po ashtu.
That's correct.
Mr. Serapi, how do you know that Jakub Krasniqi, Recep Selimi, and Fatmir Limaj were in the command with Blarim Kuchi? Did you personally see them?
Po unë kur e ceka që kam qenë edhe unë.
When I mentioned that I was also present in the meeting when they came, I then left with Drini and they remained inside with Blarim Kuchi. Based on this, I'm stating this.
Good. And you were asked by the prosecution on the 2nd of July 2024, I quote, "Was there a decision to detain Blair Mkuchi?" End of quote. And your answer was on page 17447 of the transcript. I quote, "Yes, after this, the decision was issued to detain him." End of quote. On 10 July, you were asked by counsel for Mr. Salimi to confirm that you don't know who issued the decision, and you responded on page 17987 of the transcript, "At that moment, I didn't know." Now, Mr. Serapi, the panel would like to know from you who made the decision to detain Blair Mkuchi. You said you did not know who issued the decision, so what do you know now? Who made the decision?
Spari nuk e di sa.
First of all, I do not know who exactly issued the decision. I do know that the decision was issued to detain Blair Mkuchi. Those who were present know better who issued the decision. I was not physically present there when this decision was drafted or issued.
So was the decision made during the meeting in the command? From what you know, was the decision made by the three individuals who were together with Blair Mkuchi, that is Jakub Krasniqi, Recep Selimi, and Fatma Limay?
Your Honor, I believe the witness has already said he left the meeting, so whether or not he's in a position to answer that question.
Please allow the question to be answered. Go ahead, you may answer the question.
Nuk mund ta di prej tyre.
I cannot know who of them made this decision. I was not present there to see. I know that the decision was issued, made, and he was detained.
And Mr. Serapi, you said on the 10th of July 2024 that the decision was issued on the same day, that is the 16th of January 1999, correct?
Yes, I mentioned it earlier. That was made on that day.
Let me ask you again, how do you know that the decision to detain Mr. Kuchi was issued on the 16th of January, on the same day?
We know that Mr. Kuchi was detained, imprisoned on that very day.
So your evidence is that Mr. Kuchi was arrested and imprisoned on that day, on the 16th of January, 1999?
Yes, on that day.
And how do you know that? Did you see it or did you hear it from someone?
After this decision was made, after I finished with Commander Durini was also informed that he had been arrested. And when I asked Jakub Krasniqi, he confirmed that this measure had been taken and that he was arrested. I did not see the decision, and I do not know who made that decision.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is clear now. My next questions are about another exhibit which was used during your examination by the prosecution, namely Exhibit P01414, or SPOE 00228820. Can we please bring that up? Thank you. Mr. Serapi, on the 2nd of July 2024, you confirmed on page 17457 of the transcript that you recognize the stamp and the signature on this document as the stamp of the General Staff and the signature of Mr. Jakub Krasniqi. And you further said you recall, more or less, this order forbidding the use of masks being issued, correct?
Yes, correct.
And at the time, some people were appearing with masks. Therefore, this order was issued to prevent the use of masks, and you were aware of this because there were complaints received from operational zones about people or soldiers wearing masks. Is this correct?
That's correct.
Now I would like to ask you the following. First, who exactly complained that people were appearing with masks? Did these complaints come from the operational zone commanders?
Yes, there were from operative zones, Bashtyk, Shala, Berenica. From what I can remember, we received complaints, such complaints at the time, from zone commanders.
And in what form were these complaints submitted? In written form or orally?
They
were submitted orally during the meetings.
During the meetings with the General Staff or members of the General Staff and operational zone commanders?
I remember this was mostly during my visits in the zones, but also during the meetings with the commander.
Can you explain why it was a problem that people or soldiers were wearing masks?
It was a problem because those who wore masks to avoid being identified were operating in zones where they were not assigned, or they had no authority to deal with civilians or to seize material means or to detain people. So the problem was that we could not know or identify the persons who were detaining or seizing these items. And these were soldiers that did not belong to the said zones. Hence the decision was made.
And finally, was this order, to your knowledge, implemented and followed?
It was sent to all zones. I do not know to what extent was it implemented. We gave and sent many orders, but not all of them were fully implemented by zone commanders.
Were there still complaints after the order was issued and sent to the operational zones? So after January 1999?
From what I can remember, no, we did not have such actions.
Thank you. My next questions concern the third day of your testimony, which was on the 3rd of July 2024. And could I ask the court officer to put exhibit P00633 for us on the screen? Thank you. As you can see, Mr. Serapi, this document is dated 12 February 1999, and it is said to contain, among other things, the appointment of Salih Vezeli as the acting commander of the Pastrik operational zone. You explained in relation to this document that it was not your prerogative as chief of staff to appoint zone commanders, brigade commanders, or battalion commanders. You said battalion commanders and officers within the zones were not to be appointed by the commander or the chief of the general staff. They were rather appointed by the zone commanders, correct?
Po, sakt.
Correct.
Said that you did not want to sign or agree with the changes, sign the document or agree with the changes or replacements in the Pastrik zone because, one, you did not want to change the zone commander for professional reasons, and two, it was not your competence to replace the zone commander. Do you remember saying this?
Po, sakt, ashtu është.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm referring here to pages 17497 to 17499 of the transcript. Mr. Serapi, the panel would like to know from you whose competence it was to replace a zone commander. Who in the KLA had the authority to do that?
Po, komandantën e zonë.
Yes. Only the general commander had the right to replace the zone commander. Obviously, if the change of and the replacement of that commander is proposed by the chief of staff, and the reasons for his replacement are submitted, which is he's incapable of performing his duties, he's incapable of leading the units, then this can lead to the replacement of the zone commander. But if he has all the skills, the capabilities, and is acting accordingly, then he's not replaced. Therefore, in this case, I did not agree with the replacement of the zone commander. However, the commander of the staff makes this, and so the zone commander's replacement is proposed, and then the general commander approves it or not. The deputy commanders are proposed by the zone commanders and then appointed by the general staff. So is the personnel directorate which prepares the document with the reasons why the replacement is being made, and then the general commander or the deputy signs the appointment in that position. The other appointments are all made by the zone commander within the zone. The brigade commanders were proposed by the zone commander and appointed by the general staff. All the others within the framework of the brigade were proposed and appointed by the zone commander. The battalion commanders were proposed by the brigade commander and approved by the zone commander.
Thank you. Coming back to my original question about the replacement of a zone commander, would the general staff or other members of the general staff be involved in such a decision, and if so, how? I mean, before the general commander replaces or decides to replace the zone commander, would there be a meeting, for example?
Për këto kemi pas një takim.
We had a meeting in relation to this as a staff, in which meeting I refused the change. However, there is also the Personnel Officers Commission, which proposes such a proposes the replacement of a zone commander or another senior officer, which is then submitted to the general commander for the final decision.
And Mr. Serapi, who proposed the appointments of the people in this exhibit P00633? Did these proposals come from the Pastric operational zone?
I don't know where they came from, who made these proposals and how they were made.
Just to be clear on that point, were these people mentioned in this document actually appointed? For example, did Sali Vesely actually become acting commander of the Pastric operational zone in February 1999? I think you already said no. Is that right?
Ja, nog als de heer.
No, he never became one.
What was the reason for this? Because you didn't want to sign the document, or was it rejected? Were the proposals rejected by the general commander? Or what was the reason for the fact that they weren't appointed?
The reason was that first I've never seen this document before. This document was not shown to me at the time or offered to, or asked me to sign it. I refused this proposal. Other matters were to be dealt with by the zone commander. However, I did not agree with this, and this did not come into effect. And at the time, the general commander had not taken a decision. The time period when this happened, the general commander was outside the country, his deputy was inside the country, and we started the process of replacing the general commander, as it can be seen in future meetings with the zone commanders. Therefore, this replacement did not come into effect. First, because I did not agree with this replacement, and secondly, because the general commander was not present to approve this change.
Mr. Serapi, we heard about the replacement of Commander Drini in spring 1999. Could I ask you to briefly explain again how that went, technically? I'm not interested, at least not for now, about the reasons. I don't want to know, or I don't want to hear from you about the reasons, but just can you describe the procedure, how that went?
I don't know the exact procedure that the Personnel Commission followed. They gave the proposal to the General Commander, and the commander who took this decision for the replacement at the time was Suleiman Selimi, the overall commander. And he made that decision, and we wrote that decision for the replacement of Commander Drini with Tahir Sinani at the time.
Now I would like to ask you, do you know the reason or the reasons why Commander Drini was replaced and why Tahir Sinani was appointed?
He was replaced because at the time there were consistent requests for Commander Drini to be removed from that position. And as you can see from the meetings that were held, Recep Selimi asked consistently for Drini to be replaced by somebody else and removed from this position. This was the reason that was given at the time, and also some reports from the zones were mentioned in this context, which I did not see at the time. However, I did see those reports later on, and from them I could see that that was not the reason. That is the reason that was presented in those reports. This is how the decision for his replacement was made.
And were there complaints about Commander Drini's military performance, or what was the reason? Why were people asking for a replacement?
Jo, nuk ishte nga aspektet ushtarake, se
Not from a military or professional point of view. It was mostly for the following reasons. The group of officers that arrived in November and were distributed in Pastrik zone, that was the result of the agreement with the Bukoshi government, and they were considered part of FARC, which was not true. They were all soldiers of the KLA. At the moment the agreement was signed, they accepted that they were under the command of the KLA and the general staff of the KLA. They were not members of any other formation and did not have any other distinctive insignia. The Bukoshi part attempted to provide other documentation, but we did resolve this issue with the arrival of FARC, with Mr. Bitai, and these young men were then assigned to these units and commands, and they acted upon the orders of the general staff and the commanders of the zones of the general staff, and there was no other military impact or influence on them. And this was the background of the report, claiming that Commander Drini was not cooperative, and this was not true. The officers, regardless of the units that they belonged, were the same, regardless of their party affiliations. They were the same. They all have their own rights, politically speaking, when considered outside their professional military training. So these were the reasons that were mentioned, and for me these reasons were not valid at all. This was the reason that led to his replacement, to the replacement of the zone commander.
Thank you. And just to be clear on that point, was Commander Drini also considered part of FARC? Or to be part of FARC?
faktikisht në të raportin dje.
In fact, the report that we saw yesterday, which was read, the report of Mr. Halit Yahai and Chadraku, not only him, but I, too, as Chief of Staff, was considered such, and this continues even in public media. Today, these officers are called FARC. My joining of the KLA and Commander Drini's was in the KLA. We were part of the KLA, and Commander Drini was amongst the first to join the units at the time. He was part of the Çeliku units in Kabashi area of Prizren, and when I arrived in Kosovo, I found him there as part of that unit. How can he be a FARC recruited officer or member of the ministry that was at the time? These gentlemen called us such at the time and continue to call us as such even now.
Thank you. For my next questions, I would like to go back in time when you first entered Kosovo during the war. It was in May 1998, right?
Po, ma
Yes, May 1998.
During your cross-examination by the Thaçi defense that you entered Kosovo together with Agim Celaj, Hashim Thaçi, Kadri Veseli, and Adem Grabovci, correct?
po, edhe tjerë.
Yes, and others.
For the record, this is on pages 175, 47, and 8 of the transcript. Mr. Serapi, when you entered Kosovo with Mr. Thaçi and Mr. Veseli, what were the two wearing? Were they wearing a uniform or civilian clothes?
Po, që kam kujtuar të gjithë kemi qenë.
As far as I remember, we were all wearing uniforms. The whole group was wearing uniforms, apart from several people who were carrying the weapons, who were supplying the weapons.
This would have been my next question. Did Mr. Thaçi and Mr. Veseli have a weapon when they entered Kosovo with you? And if so, what kind of weapon?
Të gjithë grupi keni pas.
All of us in the group were armed. We had personal weapons. We usually were armed with a Kalashnikov A47. Myself, Mr. Thaçi and Mr. Veseli, as well as others, had that weapon. In addition, we had, all of us were carrying an extra weapon for those who were inside Kosovo.
And later on, when you met the two, Mr. Thaçi and Mr. Veseli, during the war, what were they wearing and did they carry a weapon, as far as you remember?
Në varësisht prej situatave nga
Depending on the situation, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in civilian clothes, sometimes carrying long weapons, sometimes not. Not only them, myself included, depending on the activity, the movement.
Thank you. My next questions are about what you understood to be Mr. Thaçi's role or function in the General Staff. You told us on the 3rd of July 2024 that Mr. Thaçi was covering the Media and Public Relations Directorate in June 1998, and he held the position as Director for Media and Communication until November 1998, when he eventually became the political representative of the KLA. Is that right?
Po.
Yes, correct.
You further said on page 17549 of our transcript that Mr. Thaçi was appointed political representative of the KLA because of his prior experience with the public and the media, and he knew also the international aspects. So you said he was assigned to this task, which he carried out until Rambouillet, after which he became Prime Minister of the Provisional Government of Kosovo. Is that correct?
Po sakt.
That's correct, yes.
I would like to know the following now. What exactly were Mr. Thaçi's duties as Director for Media and Communication? In other words, what was he doing at that time, as far as you know?
From what I know from that time and from what I could see, these were issues related to the media and internationals and relations with diplomats. He also had contacts with the political representatives who were active in various Western countries.
Did you personally see him speaking to journalists while you were together?
No, personally I didn't.
Did Mr. Thaçi also give interviews on television at that time?
No.
That I don't know.
What else did Mr. Thaçi do apart from being Director for Media and Communication, as far as you know? Or was this a full-time job, 24 hours a day?
We were all busy 24 hours a day. He did deal with the media and also with the political representatives abroad in European or Western countries. And he dealt with the discussions with foreign diplomats at the time. This is as far as I remember and I know from that time.
As far as you know, of course, was he also responsible, perhaps in cooperation with the spokesperson of the KLA, for drafting and publishing communiques or political or other declarations of the KLA?
I don't know about that. I had no access.
So you don't know who was responsible for preparing official declarations of the KLA?
No, I don't know.
Thank you. Mr. Serapi, I have another question about the role of Mr. Thaçi as political representative of the KLA before he became Prime Minister of in the PGOK, the Provisional Government of Kosovo. We have heard several times that Adem Demaci, who was residing in Pristina during the war, was also a political representative of the KLA. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So I wonder what was the difference between Mr. Thaçi's and Mr. Demaci's role if both were political representatives of the KLA?
As I mentioned earlier, Hashim Thaçi was assigned to be in the political directorate exclusively for discussions with internationals because of his experience. Adem Demaci dealt with the public opinion in general in his in carrying out this duty, and this was a difference between their duties. When we speak of Hashim Thaçi, during that period, just before the restructuring, we had internationals who were observers in Kosovo, and they had to be oriented somewhere, and that was a directorate with Hashim Thaçi. Maybe there was such relation with Adem Demaci as well, but I don't know how that was coordinated or done.
Was one of the two, Mr. Thaçi or Mr. Demaci, superior to the other? And if so, who was superior?
I don't know who was superior because a political representative was a political representative. Their superior would be the command of the general staff. From organizational point of view, I don't know who their superior was.
Thank you. My next questions, before we break, 11, pertain to another issue. And Mr. Court Officer, can we please bring up P0178, which is a video and the corresponding transcript, 061427-27-TRET. I don't think we have to play the video. Was asked to repeat the P number. The P number is, or exhibit number is P01278.
And Your Honor, I would be grateful if you can direct me if you want to see the video or if it can be played or just...
No, I don't think the video has to be played. We see just the still. Mrs. Rabi, do you remember seeing this video during the first week of your testimony?
Yes, I do.
According to the English translation of what was said in the video, you said, among other things, the following, and I quote, and this is from 061427-27-TRET. During our training of the soldiers and officers, we are very much impressed by the ability and the speed at which the soldiers and officers of the Kosovo Liberation Army who are trained become so quickly prepared to meet the needs of the KLA and the needs related to the battles and fighting waged on the territory of Kosovo, end of quote. Mrs. Rabi, you confirmed in response to a suggestion from the Thaçi defense on page 17570 of the transcript that this video was recorded for propaganda purposes. Now, can I ask you the following? Was that part, or the part I just read to you, also recorded for propaganda purposes? In other words, were you, or were you actually not impressed by the ability and the speed at which KLA soldiers and officers became prepared to meet the needs of the KLA and the needs related to the battles and fighting on the territory of Kosovo. Was that propaganda or was that your impression?
First of all, the video was part of the propaganda. And there were certain elements, surprisingly, that they could learn fast, but there were other elements that they did not know. However, it was mostly part of the propaganda, claiming that they were quickly being enabled and learning to join the war in Kosovo. But as I said, it was mostly propaganda.
So, one final question on that. Was that, or do I understand your evidence correctly, that you were not convinced or you had doubts that the soldiers would acquire skills that could be used or they could use in combat against the enemy at that time?
That's correct.
That's all.
We'll take the morning break at this time, witness, so you may leave the courtroom with the court usher. We're adjourned until 11:30, or, 11:30.
All rise. All rise.
Be seated. Please bring the witness in. All right, Mr. Zarapi, we will continue with Judge Barta's questions.
Thank you and welcome back, Mr. Serapi.
Thank you.
I have another question in relation to the General Staff. You told us on the 3rd of July 2024 that the General Staff did not give green light to go forward with the attack on Ravats because it would have required, as you said, more time and preparation, equipment and units to conduct such an operation in civilian inhabited areas. And nevertheless, the commander of a local unit carried out an action without asking you or the General Staff, entered Ravats and conducted the assault which resulted, as you said, in negative consequences for the KLA. Do you remember saying this?
Po.
Yes.
For the record, this can be found on page 17585 of the transcript. Mr. Serapi, one day later, on the 4th of July 2024, on page 17629 of the transcript, you were asked by the Thaçi defense about an incident in December 1998 involving Commander Remy on the Podojeva line, and you agreed with Mr. Misetic that Commander Remy wouldn't listen to requests from the General Staff Operational Directorate to withdraw his forces from the Podojeva line. Do you recall this?
Po.
Yes.
First question in this context is this: did the General Staff Operational Directorate give Commander Remy a direct order to withdraw his forces from the Podojeva line?
Само кujtohet po.
From what I can remember, yes.
And who gave him the order?
Mu kujtohet në atë kohë.
From what I can remember at the time, I discussed this with the deputy commander of the operative zone, and I advised him to withdraw or to stop the advance towards the fighting area. I did not have direct contacts with Commander Remy at the time, but I did have contacts with the deputy commander, and I'm speaking for myself. I do not know about the others.
So, Mr. Serapi, as a former professional soldier, you certainly know the difference between an order and an advice. So let me ask you again, did you give the deputy commander the order, or an order, or did you advise him to withdraw the forces from the Podojeva line?
Po në atë kohë ka qenë
At that time, it was some sort of an advice.
And was that sort of advice binding for Commander Remy? In other words, was Commander Remy Remy, yes, sorry, free to follow the order?
pa e ka pas në dorë drejt për
He had the right to make decisions in his zone and to proceed further. We received information that things happened, but we were not in a position to know better than the zone commander or deputy commander what actually happened in the zone. Therefore, from the professional aspect, in the framework of the operational directorate, I gave this advice because we did not agree and we did not give the green light for these actions. But sometimes the zone commanders would act or would refuse to act based on their own decision.
And was that a problem? That zone commanders, as you said, sometimes would act or would refuse to act based on their own decision? Was that a problem for you as for other members of the General Staff?
Po.
Yes.
And would there be, or were there any follow-ups, any reactions from your side after Commander Remy did what he wanted to do and didn't withdraw from the Podojeva line?
Po jo nga.
No. I was not in a position to take any such action at the time.
From your military perspective or with your military background, is that a common problem, a common military problem, that soldiers, commanders on the ground make their own decisions and do not follow advice given by superiors?
Po, kjo është një problematik të një
This is a problem inherent to the army we had, the Kosovo Liberation Army that was in the process of developing. This wouldn't happen in regular armies who have a different system. We had such cases and events in our army, and we were not able to issue or take any specific measures in this regard.
Can you tell us another incident where zone commanders or local commanders ignored advice given to them by the operative or the operational directorate within the general staff?
Pa mund të japim edhe rastin
I can describe the attack in Balachev, which was conducted without the permission or the green light of the staff or the operational directorate. This was another action that was carried out.
Which year?
në 98 është.
In 98. I don't know if it was August or another month when the attack was carried out in the Lechevs with the superficial unit, where the zone command did not ask for the consent of the operational director to carry out this attack.
And later on, can you give us also an example for
Interpreter's correction, line 5, it's not the superficial unit, but open pit mine.
Raste tjera.
I don't know, now I don't remember. There are other cases. These are the operations or events that I do remember.
And was that a common problem or a problem throughout the war, or did that change throughout the war, let's say in 1999, after the restructuring, or after November 1998, the restructuring of the General Staff and the KLA in general? Did that change?
Pa problematika ka qenë çdo herë.
This was a constant problem up to until the end of the war, but the operational actions, as those that happened earlier, did not happen anymore, or at least a much smaller number. I don't remember any specific events similar to those.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Sarabi, I would like to ask you about another topic that was addressed during cross-examination by the Thaçi and the Salimi defense. You confirmed that in summer 1998, when it was alleged that Serbian civilians were abducted in the course of the attack on Raovac, you did not have the ability to arrest, for example, a zone commander, because you did not have a military police unit at your disposal as the director of the operational directorate. You remember that?
Po.
Yes.
You further confirmed both during your cross-examination by the Thaçi and the Salimi defense that you or the General Staff did not take any disciplinary measures since you did not have the structures to take such measures. And you said, this can be found on page 17589 of the transcript, and I quote, "All we could do eventually was to replace the officer in question from the commanding position and remove him," end of quote. Do you remember saying this during your cross-examination?
Po.
Yes.
Mr. Serapi, I would like to know the following. Do you know whether officers or soldiers were in fact replaced or removed after you learned about the allegations of abducted Serbian civilians?
Po c'è perché te sei
With respect to this, in the whole case of Rahovets, I explained who started this action as a preliminary measure against the commander who led the local staff in Rahovets. We could not take any measures against him because he fell and was killed during the fighting in Rahovets. So there were no measures we could take against him because he was not alive anymore.
If I'm not mistaken, you told the Salimi defense on the 10th of July 2024 on page 17933 of the transcript that the alleged abduction of Serbian civilians, Mr. Roberts called them prisoners, was not discussed within the general staff or among its members, correct?
Po saktë.
Correct.
It was never discussed whether the allegations against the KLA were true or false. Is that your evidence?
Po në përgjithësi nuk është.
It was not discussed in general terms. At least I'm speaking for myself, because from the beginning of Rahovets attack up until September, there were successive offensives. We didn't have time to discuss or deal with these matters at the time.
Did you personally ask anyone whether the allegations were true?
Jo, se
No, because first of all, I was not aware of this when I learned it. It was too late to further inquire about this.
And was there a discussion in the general staff or among its members, as far as you know, in August 1998, after the allegations became, as you said, public, or later, how to deal with those who were responsible for the alleged abduction of the Serbian civilians?
Jo.
No. As I said, in the month of August, there were constant assaults and attacks conducted in August, so I did not have time or the ability to discuss these matters.
Mr. Serabi, what I would like to understand is this. You said in your SPO interview, part 3, at page 14, that you heard about allegations of abducted Serb civilians from the media at the end of August 1998, and you learned it from a denial that had been issued by the KLA. So I wonder, how could it be that allegations were denied if there were no resources for investigating whether the allegations were true or false, if there were no discussions among members of the general staff, at least to your knowledge? So why were allegations denied if nobody was able to find out whether they were true or whether they were made up, for example, by Serbian propaganda?
Zotë prokuror, unë
Your Honor, I mentioned this. I was not able to do this because of the offensives and their movements. I was not able to hear if there was any discussion between the staff members, if there was any opinion expressed or any statement issued.
Just to be clear on that part, I wasn't referring to you. I didn't mean you. I didn't suggest that you should have inquired. But anyway, let's move on. Mr. Serapi, you also discussed with the Thaçi defense on the 4th of July 2024 the role of Azim Zula as the overall or general commander of the KLA. And you told us that the chief of staff, or as chief of staff, you received orders and instructions from Mr. Zula when Mr. Zula was inside the country, you said, and when he could send those. This is from page 17627 of the transcript. Do you remember saying that on the 4th of July or during your cross-examination by the Thaçi defense?
Well,
Yes.
Excuse me. When Mr. Zula was not in Kosovo, how often did you receive orders or instructions from him? Was that every day or once a week or once a month? So how often could he send orders?
ja, nu kan muito shumë shpejt.
He could not do that frequently. I was not able to receive frequent instructions from Mr. Sula. In particular, during November, December, he was only on one occasion in Kosovo when we met and received instructions to discuss with Mr. Sula. Before that, when I was in Albania in November, we discussed internal matters. But then in January, February, I did not have contacts with him. Then he went to Rambouillet, and I saw him when he came back from Rambouillet. If something was needed to be sent in written form, this would be sent through a courier and would reach us 2 or 3 days later, depending on how the courier could travel to bring us an order, advice, or instruction from the general staff. So we had very rare contacts.
When you were still in Kosovo, so before September, before you left, and Mr. Zula was in Albania, did you receive telephone calls from him? Did you call him or did he call you?
Ja, para se shkojnë në Shqipëri.
No, not before I went to Albania, because I did not have a telephone, and I obviously could not have telephone contacts with him.
And you just mentioned that Mr. Zula was also coming, or that he came to Kosovo and he was in the country. In your SPO interview, part 14 on page 7 and the following pages, you said that he was in Kosovo in August. Mr. Zula was in Kosovo in August 1998, in December 1998 for 1 or 2 weeks, in January 1999 for 4 or 5 days, and in February 1999 for 2 days before and 2 days after Rambouillet. Is that right? Is that still your evidence?
Po,
Yes. From what I can remember, in August, yes. December, yes. January, when he came, when the Rechak events occurred. I know also that he was there before he went to Rambouillet and when he returned from Rambouillet in February. And then I saw him again when I went to Albania.
In your SP interview, part 14, and I'm referring to the same pages, pages 7 and the following, or page 7 and the following pages, you said that you did not see Mr. Zula in June and July 1998, and you, as you just said, you met him in Tirana in September 1998. Is that right?
po në qershor edhe
In June and July, I did not see him in Kosovo. In August, yes. And then again in September when I went to Albania.
How often did you meet Mr. Zula during the time Mr. Zula was in Kosovo, approximately? Did you meet him every day or only once or twice during his stays in Kosovo, during his visits?
Ja, nuk është
When he was in Kosovo, I did not really see him frequently. We probably met one day or 2 days, depending on how long he stayed in Kosovo, because he didn't stay long. He would stay 2, 3, 4 days, depending on the situation on the ground. So during that time period, I might have seen him 2 or 3 times.
Thank you. Let's move on to a different topic. Mrs. Rapi, on pages 176, 31, and 2 of the transcript, you talked about communication between the general staff and the zone commanders, and you said that until November 1998, it was difficult for you or for the general staff to communicate with zone commanders. In your SPO interview at part 14, page 11, and I think this passage was also read to you today by Mr. Mizitic from the Thaçi defense, you said that from June to November 1998, you only had Motorola equipment that was a very short network or short range. Do you remember saying that to the prosecution in your interview?
po.
Yes.
Were these Motorola devices radio devices or mobile phones?
Jo, radio.
Radio devices, which we used at the time. Short frequencies, not long frequencies.
And what was approximately the range of these devices, if you know?
Faktikisht me tonë varësisht për
Depending on the relay antennas, usually this range would be 5 to 10 kilometers, not further than that.
And you said today that you personally did not have a phone, a mobile phone. Did you have a radio device, such a device, a Motorola device, in summer 1998?
po.
Yes, I had a Motorola, but I did not have a telephone.
The other soldiers, KLA soldiers, using mobile phones during that time?
Telefona mobil kanë pas.
People had mobile phones, depending on where they got them from, but I did not see satellite phones.
I was talking about regular mobile phones, not about satellite mobile phones. You said you saw mobile phones, people with mobile phones. Is that your evidence?
Po, me telefona
Yes, mobile phones. So these are personal phones, whereas satellite phones are different. As I explained to the question of the prosecutor, they were in the shape of a laptop. Yes, at a later stage, but at the time we're talking about, some people had mobile phones, personal phones, but not satellite phones.
Just to be very clear on that point, you did not personally have you did not have a private mobile phone at that time, right?
Jo, nuk kam.
No, I didn't.
Thank you. Mr. Sarabi, my next questions relate to Exhibit 1D00029-ET. Mr. Court Officer, could we please have this exhibit on the screen? Thank you, Mr. Serabi. Do you remember seeing and discussing this exhibit with the Thaçi defense on the 4th of July 2024, and I think also with other defense teams later?
Paul?
Yes.
Now, point 4 of this order says the arrest, detention, or imprisonment of persons without an order from a brigade commander or above is prohibited, except in the case of critical combat situation or when various criminal offenses were being committed against members of the KLA, against individuals, or the civilian authorities. Do you see that?
Paul?
Yes. Yes.
And you said in response to a question by Mr. Misetic that this provision was included because there were complaints and the aim was to discipline all soldiers, in particular those who were still not under full command. Is that correct? Remember?
Paul?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. For the record, I was referring to page 17640 of the transcript. Now, point 6, we can scroll down. Thank you. Point 6 of this order explicitly refers to a military court. And you confirm that if someone was suspected to be a collaborator, you wanted that person to be sent to the legal department for processing. Is that right?
Paul, the sector.
Yes, to the legal sector for further measures.
My first question in this context is this: can you tell us again who established the military court or military courts, if there was more than one? Was that Mr. Sokol de Bruna?
På Musk side,
After this, because when this order was written, it was still being formed. However, later on, this legal sector, led by Mr. Sokol de Bruna, he was the one who established this.
On the 4th of July 2024, you said that Mr. de Bruna was appointed upon proposal of the General Commander Azam Zula and Mr. de Bruna's zone commander Ramush Haradinaj, because Mr. de Bruna was from Mr. Haradinaj's zone, the Dukajini zone, and this is on page 17642 of the transcript. In your cross-examination by the Krasniqi defense on the 11th of July 2024 on page 18084 of the transcript, you said the following, and I quote, question. And on Thursday last week, you were asked by Mr. Misetic about the appointment of Mr. de Bruna in November 1998, and you stated that the decision to appoint Mr. de Bruna was made by the General Commander Azam Zula. And then you were asked on the 11th of July 2024 by counsel for Mr. Krasniqi, do you recall that? And your answer was yes. And then question, and a document such as this, if it was signed by Mr. Krasniqi, he was only formalizing a decision already made by the General Commander. Am I correct? And your answer was yes, correct. End of quote. Mr. Court Officer, can we please have exhibit P1175 on the screen, both in the English and the Albanian? I repeat, P1175. Thank you. Mr. Serapi, the English translation of this exhibit reads as follows. First paragraph, in its meeting held on 12 November 1998, based on the need for the reorganization, structuring, and institutionalization at a higher level, the General Staff makes this decision. Sokol Dobruna, from Gaikove, by profession an attorney, is appointed as chief of the juridical sector in the cabinet of the commander of the KLA GS General Staff. And Mrs. Rabi, just to be clear what your evidence is on this point, who made the decision to appoint Sokol Dobruna? Was that the General Staff by way of a majority decision or by consensus, or was it Azem Zula alone in his capacity as General Commander, or was it one of his deputies?
Takimin 12-11.
The meeting on the 12th of November for the restructuring involved all of the general staff of the KLA. And during that meeting, a request was made for such a person with experience to be appointed. And commanders of the zones were asked during that meeting to put forward proposals based on people they knew and so forth for this position. Of course, this also involves the aspect of the general commander because it's part of his cabinet. This is how it was preceded. The commanders of the zones were asked for proposals, and the commander of the Dugagini operational zone made the proposal because Mr. Dobruna was part of that area. And he was proposed, as I said, by the commander of the Dugagini zone. The proposal was sent to the staff. Of course, the general commander was asked for his opinion, and he was then approved to be assigned to the legal sector, and he was eventually assigned to that sector.
And was there a vote within the General Staff, among the members of the General Staff? Before it was sent, the proposal was sent to the General Commander?
Jo, nuk është bërë diçka veçantë.
No, nothing special. It came as a proposal, and the general commander then made the decision and prepared the order in this respect. There was nothing in particular, meaning voting or other proposals.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to another point. You said that the military court mentioned in point 6 of the previous exhibit was also created to deal with the issue of collaborators. Is that correct?
Po.
Yes.
And was that military court or the military court system in general also supposed to deal with civilian collaborators, that is, non-KLA members?
Po tjera sektore juridike nuk e.
We did not have other legal sectors. We did not have civilian legal sectors in Kosovo at that time. This was the only sector that would and could deal with both civilian and military aspects.
As far as you know, how many cases of civilian collaborators or non-KLA members were tried before the military court after it was established?
Pasi u krijuar?
After it was created?
After it was created, of course.
Nuk e di rastet.
I don't know how many cases there were. Sokol Dobruna should know that because I didn't deal with that matter. I could only give my advice for maintenance and security, but I do not have knowledge about how many cases there were.
During the first week of your testimony here and also during your cross-examination by the Krasniqi defense, you discussed the case of the two Serbian woodcutters who were allegedly abducted and mistreated in February 1999, and one of them died while in custody. You remember that case and that you discussed it with the prosecution here and with the defense?
Po, më kujt.
I do. I remember this case.
Do you know whether the persons who were responsible for the detention and mistreatment of the two woodcutters were later investigated and punished by the KLA?
Jo, nuk e.
No, I don't know. I don't know what measures were taken and what was done.
Were you informed by Mr. De Bruyne or by another person from the legal sector about any investigations or disciplinary measures regarding that case, the case of the two woodcutters, or other cases involving the alleged abducted or mistreatment of civilians?
Jo, nuk kam njohjen ato që.
No, I don't have any knowledge about that.
Excuse me, there's a mistranscription of Judge Barter's question. Instead of you were at the beginning, it should read were you.
That's right. Thank you very much, Mr. Emerson. The reason, Mr. Serapi, why I'm asking that is that because you said in the Milutinovic trial, and also here on page 17627 and 8 of the transcript, that your duties as Chief of Staff included, among other things, disciplinary measures. This is why I was asking you whether you were informed or not. But you said you were not informed, you had no knowledge, right?
Po, nuk jam informuar për.
That's right. I was not informed about that matter, whether measures were taken or not.
Who was responsible for overseeing the work of the military court?
Komanda.
The command. The commander and his cabinet.
Mrs. Serapi, practically speaking, how can Mr. Züller oversee the work of the legal sector when he was in Albania most of the time and Mr. Dobruna was not available? And maybe one of the two deputy commanders was responsible for this, or maybe both. Is that right?
Po, në mungesë e komandantit në zë?
Well, in the absence of the commander, the deputies are there and they do the work and oversee this sector.
Both deputies or just one? And if so, which of the two was responsible to oversee the legal sector?
Të dytë e kanë pasur.
Both of them, but mostly Deputy Jakub Krasniqi, because he was closer there.
Now I would like to move on to a different topic. I would like to ask you who was in charge of the Military Police Directorate after it was created.
Pas krimit të...
after it was created, in charge of the military police directorate was Fatmir Limay. He was appointed to this function.
And was there another person who was in charge of the military police directorate before Mr. Limay became head of that directorate?
Jo, så nu kan existu kjo drejt.
No, because this directorate did not exist before that. As far as I know, it was created with the restructuring of the staff of the Kosovo Liberation Army.
I understand. And so Mr. Limay, Fatmir Limay, was the first director of the military police at the general staff level, correct?
Po kështu është.
Yes, that's correct.
Limay do before he became the head of the military police directorate? Did he have another role or another position in the KLA?
Po, para se
Yes, before he became director of the military police directorate, he was commander of 121 Brigade.
And can you tell us again who appointed Mr. Limay as head of the military police directorate?
Drejtorisë Policisë Ushtarake në
With the restructuring of the general staff, we asked for proposals who to be appointed at this position. I don't know who made the proposal, and he was placed in the directorate of the military police. And this is during the transformation of the general staff of the KLA.
So in principle, it was the same procedure as the appointment of Mr. Dobruna, is that right?
Sakt.
That's right.
And can you tell us when exactly he was appointed?
Me formimin e
With the restructuring of the general staff of the KLA, now I don't know whether it's November or later, the 12th and these dates that mark the beginning of the transformation, but it was November. It's towards the end of November, but I don't remember the exact date.
And Mr. Sarabi, do you know whether Mr. Limay had already taken over the position as head of the military police directorate or head of the military police before he was formally appointed?
Nuk di si ka mujt ta marrë këtë.
I don't know how he would formally be able to take over that position when the restructuring of the general staff had not begun. As far as I know, there was no military police directorate before that. Had there been one, I would have seen that. So to my knowledge, I don't know if there was anybody before that to lead this directorate.
Just to be clear, I'm not speaking about the formal appointment, I'm talking about the actual work. And just to let you know why I'm asking that, on page 17836 of the transcript, you agreed with the Veseli defense that although Menzo Kasumi had not formally been appointed as the replacement of Mr. Veseli as head of the intelligence directorate, until the beginning, you said, beginning of April 1999, Mr. Kasumi had already performed some intelligence functions prior to this formal appointment. So I wonder whether this could also be true or could have been true in relation to Mr. Limay, in relation to the military police.
Jo, shka e diu.
No, I did not have such knowledge, and he did not exercise such duties.
Thank you. Finally, are you aware of any complaints that lower levels at the zone had reported directly to the general staff? Have you heard, for example, of complaints that the military police at the brigade level had directly reported to the military police directorate, of course, after it was created, it had been created, or that the intelligence sector at the brigade level had directly reported to the intelligence directorate without reporting to their respective zone commanders? Have you heard of such complaints?
Dëgjojnë, ristrukturimi kur ka filluar,
When the restructuring started, many people who were on positions and tasks posed, they did not know what their duties and responsibilities were. There were such that were conscious of what they should do, and there were others that were not. The intelligence sectors or intelligence and counterintelligence sectors in zone level, they report to brigade commanders. However, if, for example, the staff asks for information concerning the movement and positions of the enemy forces, such information could go directly to the general staff. However, the sectors themselves would report to the brigade commanders, not higher up. That is, not directly report to the sector at general staff level.
Have you heard of complaints that during the time that Commander Drini was operational zone commander, lower levels at the zone reported directly to the general staff, thereby not reporting to Commander Drini directly to the general staff or members of the general staff?
Yes, there was one complaint, especially this one with intelligence, counterintelligence matters. I don't know whether he reported or not, and to whom, when he assumed that duty, but he did not report to the person who replaced him. Then the commander of the zone took measures and settled the issue of reporting, because people like Mr. Chadraku, for example, would act on their own decisions. According to them, other directors had to be informed. They, pursuant to rules, have to cooperate between each other, but not reporting. The reporting should go by the zone commanders, and then the information can go higher up, the information that is to be sent higher up. So there were such instances, but not many.
Thank you. My next questions are about what you told us on the 8th of July 2024 during your cross-examination by the Veseli defense. On page 17795 of the transcript, you confirmed that the process of allocating tasks within the general staff itself to different individuals started on the 12th of November 1998, and it continued onwards, you said. Do you remember saying this?
Po, kujtohet.
Yes, I remember saying that.
And on the next page, this is page 17796 of the transcript, you were asked by Mr. Emerson if it was you, as Chief of Staff, who made the decision that Mr. Veseli should be appointed to intelligence and sent to Albania for training in November, and you answered, yes, I made the decision for him to be sent to training. A bit later, Mr. Serapi, on page 17814 of the transcript, Mr. Emerson stated the following on the record, I quote, now again you said you had appointed Mr. Veseli to G2 in November and then dispatched him for training with the Albanian intelligence shortly thereafter, end of quote, and you responded to this and to another suggestion by Mr. Emerson, yes, that's correct. Now, just to be clear what your evidence is, did you actually appoint Mr. Veseli as head of the Intelligence Directorate or G2 in November 1998, as it was suggested to you by Mr. Emerson?
Ja,
No. It could have been a proposal only because a commander does the appointments to director positions. It is true that I sent him to training, so it could be a mix-up. The proposal, yes, came from me, but it is the commander who appointed him to the position of the Director of Intelligence and Counterintelligence Directorate.
Thank you. And can you tell us why you proposed Mr. Veseli for the position as head of the Intelligence Directorate? What were the reasons why you proposed him?
për arsye se ka udhëheq drejtorinë.
Because he led the Information Directorate earlier on, and for sake of continuity with the restructuring of the General Staff, for him to continue to develop this directorate. This was the reason behind the proposal.
Thank you. My next question is this, Mr. Serapi, according to paragraph 17 of preparation note 2, you told the SPO, the prosecution, in your preparation session that between September and November 1998, your source of information about the developments in Kosovo was Azem Zula and Kadri Veseli. And you were asked about that, but only briefly, but only in relation to Mr. Zula by the Krasniqi defense, and today the prosecution, and that is on page 6 of the real-time transcript, asked you the following, I quote, did you have contact with Kadri Veseli during that time period? And when the prosecutor was referring to the time period September and October 1998. And your answer was, I had contacts with Kadri Veseli after I returned from the Western countries, and we started the negotiations, discussions with the Bukoshi government, but not prior to that. End of quote. Can I ask you, first, Mr. Serapi, when did you exactly return to, I assume, Albania?
Në Shqipëri,
I returned to Albania from the west at the end of October. I do not remember the exact date right now.
And before you returned to Albania, you never spoke to Kadri Veseli? He never called you or you called him?
çka di unë,
As far as I know, we did not meet during that time. I know that the last phone conversation was in the last part of October, Kadri Veseli called me and told me to return to Tirana as we had to proceed with some discussions and negotiations. This was the first phone contact that we had, as far as I remember, and then upon my return in Tirana, we met physically and we went and discussed with the Bukoshi government.
And after you had returned to Albania, what kind of information did you discuss with Mr. Veseli?
Informacionet kemi biseduar ato për
We discussed the issue of negotiations. We didn't discuss internal matters. We talked about the negotiations that would start with the Bukoshi government and about the venues of the meetings.
So you discussed political issues, is that right?
Po.
Correct. In relation to the negotiations.
Discuss military matters such as the situation of the units in Kosovo?
Situatin e sirë në Kosovë, jo, s'kemi
No, we did not discuss the situation in Kosovo. We only discussed military matters once we started our talks with the ministry within the Bukoshi government.
I'm not sure whether the transcript is correct. Your answer is recorded as we only discussed military matters once we started our talks with the ministry within the Bukoshi government. So you discussed military matters, right? But later on.
I'm obviously conscious not to say anything in front of the witness, but might it be wise for me to
We can excuse the witness if you have an objection.
Yes, I'm sorry.
We can excuse the witness.
Yes, I think it might, which, not so much an objection as a clarification, but it might be better in the absence of the witness, I think.
Go ahead, Mr. Emerson.
In relation, obviously, to the negotiations, the Bukoshi negotiations that both Mr. Vasili and Mr. Zarapi were involved in, they were primarily military negotiations in terms of the merging of the two armed forces. And I think that's where the confusion is arising in the witness's mind between, because I think Your Honour specifically referred to that as political, as distinct from military. And what I think where this confusion is arising from is that clearly it was a partly military discussion taking place with the Bukoshi government about the merging of their various resources.
We'll see if we can straighten that out.
Thank you.
You can bring the witness back in now. Thank you, Mr. Zarapi. We will continue with Judge Barta's questions.
Thank you, and welcome back, Mr. Zarapi. I was just advised that the negotiations with the Bukoshi government had a military dimension, and this might have caused some confusion. When I mentioned military matters, I was just referring or primarily referring to the situations of the troops, the KLA units on the ground in Kosovo at that time. And if I'm not mistaken, you said that this was not an issue, this was not discussed with Mr. Veseli when you met him in Albania, right?
Posak.
That's correct.
And was that discussed among the two of you, among Mr. Veseli and you, after the negotiations had started? The situation of the troops on the ground in Kosovo?
Jo, shumë se
Not that much, because I knew the situation of the units inside the territory of Kosovo up to September, and we were expecting changes that would occur in the course of September, October, so therefore we waited for us to go inside the territory of Kosovo and to get this information or updated information on the situation on the ground.
From your conversations and discussions with Mr. Veseli, did you have the impression that Mr. Veseli was also aware of the situation of the troops on the ground in Kosovo?
jo, nuk kemi biseduar.
No, we did not discuss that matter at all. We did not discuss the situation of the units on the ground. I believe he did not know either the situation or the state of the units within the territory of Kosovo.
And can you tell me the reason why you didn't discuss it? Was it not relevant for your negotiations with the Bukashi government? I mean, the situation of the troops on the ground, was that not a factor, an aspect that would be relevant for further discussions?
Jo, atë nuk ka qenë relevant.
No, they were not relevant because the discussions we had were about finding a system to unify the Bukoshi units or Bukoshi associated units and the units inside the country from the command further down, but not the details of the situation on the ground. This was not a topic discussed during the meeting.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Serapi, I have a few more questions that I would like to clarify a few more issues with you. And the first of these issues is about Mr. Recep Selimi using or attempting to use the rapid response unit of the General Staff for arresting people. Before your answer, in your examination by the SPO on page 17443 of the transcript, you stated that the reconnaissance rapid response unit was used by Recep Selimi as the Inspector General on one occasion, namely in a village in the territory of the Pastrik zone, and that was the reason why an order was issued by you, which is admitted as Exhibit P 00901, page 6967 in the English and page 6968 in the Albanian version. I don't think it's necessary that we bring it up. During your cross-examination, however, you were asked by the Selimi defense the following, and I quote, "Question, so my understanding of this document, this exhibit, the order that was issued by you, is that obviously Mr. Selimi is attempting to use this unit." And you responded, among other things, I quote, "I have explained that Mr. Selimi has not made use of it for arresting people, but it is a unit that should always be at the ready to intervene." Mrs. Rabi, do you remember saying this in response to the question?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Did Mr. Recep Selimi actually use the unit, or did he only attempt to use the unit?
Jo, ka përdorur.
Now, he did use the unit, but the unit was there in that village for disciplinary measures and not for arrests. They did not carry out arrests, despite the fact that this unit should not have been used for that, because there was a military police formed, and in the absence of the military police and the general staff, they could have hired some from the zones and carry out these actions. Because these units, reconnaissance and sabotage units and rapid response units, are there for a rapid reaction in the event of an attack or other actions carried out by the staff, but not for carrying out disciplinary measures or arrests.
And what was the disciplinary measure that was executed, and against whom was it directed?
Kjo mas disiplinore është marrë ndaj
This disciplinary measure was taken against soldiers who entered in that village, which was not under KLA control. And then most of them used phones in that location. And their conversations, soldiers communicating through those phones could have communicated information or intelligence, in particular when calling landline phones, and they were obviously intercepted by Serbian forces. So once going around in uniform in that village and doing these things were not appropriate, and these were the disciplinary measures taken, asking them to leave that location and to stop using their phones to communicate information which would reveal military secrets of the KLA. This was the reason for this disciplinary measure.
May I ask again, what exactly was the disciplinary measure? Did they seize the phones, or what did they do? The rapid response unit.
Jo,
No, they removed the soldiers from that village. They were not able to seize the phones because there were landlines, property of villagers. So the measure was to have the soldiers leave this village.
Did they remove the soldiers by force, or how did that work, if you know?
në praktikë është normal.
In practice, the use of force is also included to remove them from there. Those who resisted or who did not follow the order, they were removed. But there were no arrests or any such things. This was a disciplinary measure implemented.
Who ordered the measure, the disciplinary measure?
Jo, këtë urdhëru.
No, this was ordered by the commander. The inspector general controls these measures and has the capacity to react in his capacity, but not by me.
Just to be clear on that point, it was ordered by the general commander, and the order was executed by the general inspector, or?
Po urdhri ka qenë nga
The order came from the command. The inspector general, upon receiving the information about these events, took measures based on the instructions of the commander or the deputy commander.
Thank you. And Mr. Serabi, another final point on which the panel, at least from me, which the panel needs clarification from you, is the following. On the 10th of July 2024, on pages 17977 and 8, you were asked by the Salimi defense about a press release, this is exhibit P00303, that dealt with the arrest and detention of the two LDK officials, Cendescu and Jakub Krostrati. Do you remember discussing this with the Salimi defense last week?
Po,
Yes.
And you were also shown another document, exhibit P00300, that mentioned two Serbian journalists who were allegedly arrested by the KLA on the 18th of October 1998. Do you recall that?
po,
Yes.
In part 3 of your SPO interview and also during your cross-examination by the Krasniqi defense on the 10th of July 2024, at page 18013, you said that you had heard about the case of Mr. Descu and Mr. Castrati, but you don't know who ordered their arrest. Is that still your evidence?
po sakt se
Yes, that's correct. Because at the time when they were arrested, I was not in Kosovo.
On page 37 of part 3 of your SPO interview, you said that you talked to members of the KLA General Staff about the case of Mr. Descu and Mr. Castrati when you became Chief of Staff. Could you please tell the panel with whom you spoke?
jo, në atë kohë
At the time, after his release and the staff restructuring had started, this is the time when I discussed the matter, because I did not know that these two officials were detained. This was the time when we discussed the matter. I asked about this. I was told about the measure taken, but I was not given a clear, precise explanation of what had happened and how had it happened. So this is the moment and the conversation during which I learned that they were detained, but no further detailed discussions in this regard.
And did you learn that in a meeting of the General Staff, or was it a private conversation with an individual member of the General Staff, or more than one member?
pa masi një liruar ta dhe
After their release, this was made public. There was a meeting at the staff, a meeting within the staff. I don't know whether all staff members were present. This is the moment when I asked the question, because I did not know up until then.
And do you know who was present at that meeting?
nuk më kujtohet gjithë.
I don't remember all those who attended.
Of the four accused was present?
Po zakonisht aty
Usually, there were two of them in these meetings, in the staff meetings.
në atë kohë zoti Jakub Krasniq
At the time, it was Mr. Jakub Krasniqi and mostly Recep Selimi who attended the staff meetings. In November, December.
And what about Mr. Thaçi? In your SPU interview, you said that if Mr. Castrati and Mr. Descu were arrested because they were LDK members, then you said it would be a political issue. This is on page 39 of part 3 of the interview. Would that not be an issue, for example, for Mr. Thaçi as a political representative of the KLA?
po çka di në atë kohë lajt nuk ka qenë.
To to my knowledge, at that time, he was not a representative or head of the political directorate. At the time, he was in charge of the relation with international media. Now, was he or not, I don't know. When I came in, the restructuring of the staff had started, and I'm not aware that it existed as a directorate before. I indicated when it was formed, and that was the tasks performed by Mr. Thaçi, in charge of media and international relations.
Mrs. Rabi is, or according to the information we have, Mr. Castrati and Mr. Descu were released on the 27th of November 1998, and if I'm not mistaken, you said there was a meeting after their release, so after the 27th of November 1998. So was Mr. Thaçi already a political representative at that time?
At
the time, the proposal was made to form a political directorate. But in general, the staff was not, because when we had the staff meeting on the 28th of November, but the directorate started its work with the restructuring process.
And did you talk to anyone from the general staff about the case of the two Serbian journalists, and if so, who did you speak to?
No, I don't know. In relation to the two Serbian journalists, I saw it in the document, it was shown to me. I did not discuss this, but I do know that I heard when these journalists were released.
And discuss the case of the two Serbian journalists with anyone from the general staff?
No, I
personally didn't. I personally did not ask any question in this regard. I did not deal with this matter.
Mr. Rapi, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Zarapi, this will end your time here today. We will see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We wish you a good day. Thank you for being with us. You may leave the courtroom now. We're adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr.
I
Emerson.
apologise. Without being impertinent or making impertinent inquiries, I think it would probably be helpful if we just had a moment to take stock of what the rest of the week looks like in time terms. I think for all defence teams, I should imagine it would be helpful to know.
Well, it would be wonderful if we could finish with this witness this week. I think
do we have any sense, is really my question.
Judge Mitro has questions, of course, and Judge Gaynor has questions.
Does that likely take us to the end of the day tomorrow? This is the question. No, it does not. Okay.
I don't think it would take till the end of the day, but you may get some.
Because we only have until 11 o'clock on Thursday. That's.
Well, I've made inquiry with the witness, and he would be willing to stay for one more session on Thursday.
Well, that gives us a little bit of extra time.
But I think that's sort of so he can get finished. So we're going to have to all bear that in mind.
Totally understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? We're adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
All rise.